Hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date's October 8th, 2017. Today, I want to talk about my first year of sobriety. Sometimes I think that it's really easy to forget how bad it can get. Even though I've lived through that, I was in alcoholism for a solid 10 years before I started to consider that maybe I had a problem. I still try to stay engaged in that first step, in that understanding of the powerlessness. And although now it's more of a global powerlessness and to surrender to life in general, it's really important for me to not lose touch with what brought me to that conclusion, which was my complete loss of control with drugs and alcohol. And it wasn't just the drugs and alcohol, it was also my entire way of perceiving the world and how I functioned as a human. As they talk about in the big book, a drinker in his cups is an unlovely creature. And I'd never read a more accurate description of myself and my alcoholism. When I was drunk, I just lost all humanity and became this creature existing with the sole purpose of getting drunk and fighting a hangover by getting drunk again and lying to everybody around me to continue that behavior, right? And I would only really be around people who enabled that behavior. And it was like a decade of not a good time. I would have told you that I was having a good time because that's the delusion that I was in. I did unearth the step work I did the very first time I went through the steps. And this would have been in 2017. And I just remember that I still had a relapse. I had been trying to get sober since 2015. And then I had a relapse. And then I had some sober time in 2016. And then I had a relapse. And then in 2017, I was really trying so hard. I was going to the meetings, doing the step work, and still had a relapse. By that time, I was like, I'm either going to kill myself, alcohol is going to kill me, or I'm going to end up in jail. There were no other options. And I was thinking about that recently because I've also gotten into Christian mysticism and sitting in contemplative prayer that requires an indefinite amount of literally just sitting in silence. I do variations of different types of prayers, but this specific, I always want to say I'm just like marinating in the presence of God. And it's just here in my living room, in my studio. I think about why it's so easy for me to get into touch with that. And it's so difficult for me to explain to somebody. I remember that I began to hone in on that after my last relapse. And as I was really struggling in those first 30 days to stay sober, I was trying to get back into a sober living. In order to do that, I had to live in a home with normies who had seen me be medicated, unmedicated, stumbling down the stairs, park my car perpendicular to how I was supposed to, be just completely drunk and incoherent, listen to the angry phone calls, have friends come over to check on me. They told me it was scary to live with me because they didn't know what I was capable of. At that point, quite frankly, neither did I. I didn't know what I was capable of. It's always this weird coming to the next time that I'm sober enough to engage with reality, and hearing people's experience of me when I was drunk was bizarre. I don't know who she is. And it's, oh no, yeah, that was for sure me. And then, of course, drinking that realization away because it's too humiliating to sit in. After that last relapse, I just remember being like, oh my God, I'm going to die or kill myself or end up in jail forever because I cannot have any more DUIs. I already had my 3 DUIs. I'd already been to jail. I'd already been to rehab. I'd already been to sober livings. It was like this place of, I don't have anything to sustain me in this time. Just like the desperation of that moment. It was like physically painful. Not to mention that I was withdrawing from alcohol and trying not to die from that, and also trying to work full time, trying to convince my parents back home that everything was okay. It was a chaotic time. And the thing that helped get me through it is just this last ditch, this efforts to really connect with God because I was so lonely. And I share this story with my sponsees, but I just remember so clear. I can still feel it in my bones. Just like writhing around on this mattress on the floor, withdrawing, completely nauseous for 2 weeks, I want to say. Desperately depressed. I felt so alone. I felt so hopeless. I felt so desperate. And just this complete detachment from life. I felt so othered. I felt so shamed, so embarrassed, so disgusting. I just hated myself and literally just writhing around, begging God to get me through that next minute. Sometimes literally praying for the strength to stay sober that next second. It was so intense. It was physically just, I couldn't, it was unbearable. It was unbearable. I just remember and by the way, I'd completely abandoned the God idea during this time because if God was real, why would that have happened to me, right? Why wouldn't I have been sober since I'd gotten out of jail? And of course, these were all things that I have to work on in my step work. But at that time, I was so pissed. I still had nothing left in me but to just pray. And I would go to work in the morning. And I just remember feeling such a shell of myself, going to work in the mornings and then driving back. This was during my time when I would do nothing but listen to podcasts. There was one podcast in particular which still rockets me right to that place in time called Reply All. His voice is wildly comforting to me in some way. I had to listen because I just could not be alone with my thoughts. I didn't want to think for myself. I didn't want to hear my voice. I would just listen to podcasts and that ache in my body, in my heart of just, this is it. This is the end of myself. I cannot pull this off. I need something bigger than me to help me. I got deep into my step work and they try to humble you real quick. By that point, I finally was humbled. I'm really looking at the name of this thing. This is the step work packet called The Idiot's Guide for Really Smart People. Addicts and alcoholics are not dumb people, but wow, are we a bunch of idiots sometimes? They've since changed this. I think it's just called the 1, 2, 3 questionnaire. But this is actually this is the original copy of my step work. It actually helped me get sober and stay sober. I just want to go through some of the questions. I'm not a huge proponent of war stories. I don't really, and in AA, they will usually tell you when you share a story, talk about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And the way that I grew up in AA is you spend the minimal amount of time on what it was like. And the reason for that is because we all know what we're like. We all know and recognize if we have a problem, that's why we're in that room, right? 3 DUIs, mental institutions, jail time. I was on all the medications. I was super depressed, super anxious, lost confused. And then you really need to get into the recovery. And that's anytime that I've been asked to share, that's just the formula. You minimize the war stories because you don't want to glamorize it. But I feel like something that gets lost in that is our own experience with our first step, which takes 6 weeks for us to get through the work for the first step through the Big Book Awakening. And I needed that. I needed that desperately. And I've done it multiple times since then, because even though now I can recognize that it's not just the drugs or alcohol, it is actually just the whole way that I was experiencing and perceiving life. It is still really helpful to remind myself that it's the alcohol that can take me out. It is alcohol that can bring me to my grave. And it's important for me to remember that because it's not an overnight matter. It was something that progressed in me. For some people, they are immediate alcoholics. I was a gradual one. It got worse and worse. So it's helpful to recognize what it took me to get there and stay vigilant of that. what I like about the first step and how we do this is that it does address like the three ways that it impacts us. So there's the physical allergy. It's important that we understand that we're going through the 12 steps. This is the saving mechanism for me. What made me stay in it, there was an actual physical reaction I had that was abnormal to alcohol. I believe that there came a point where like my body did become allergic to it, and it began to process it differently, and it began to not only just like in the sense of metabolizing it, but my brain began to process the alcohol differently. And so it became dependent on it, right? And we know that alcoholism, substance use disorder is classified as a disease. While we talk about it more in a spiritual sense, the spiritual dis-ease, I still feel like it's important to validate the physical medical connection. If you told me I'm allergic to peanuts, then why on earth would I just keep eating them? That would be insanity. So is drinking after you've had the same reaction over and over again. And that there's that cliche of I can't drink alcohol, I have an allergic reaction where I break out in handcuffs. The consequences of your drinking are not actually the allergic reaction. The allergic reaction is a craving for more. And it is this inability to control it. It usually happens more often than not. For most average, moderate, temperate drinkers who do not have it in them to even develop an issue with drinking, they never lose control of the amount that they drink. And I found that astonishing. Like, it was astonishing to me to find out that most people never black out. I was like, what? That's how we slept. How did people sleep without blacking out? It was just mind blowing. And so that's the physical allergy. And it is this craving for more. It is not the consequences of the drinking. It is that when I begin to drink, I cannot stop. If I stop that first time, now my brain has told me, you can drink again. And then I'll drink more. And the next time I'll inevitably lose control. The time, the place will come when I will lose control and I will drink alcohol if I'm not staying in fit spiritual conditions. That was really fascinating to me. Was frothy emotional appeal enough to keep you sober permanently? Like someone begging you to stop. If something can keep you sober, must it have a depth and weight? Even if I really wanted to stop, I'd stop. Nothing helped me stop. Even though I really wanted to stop, so I'd stop hurting my boyfriend, my friends, or my family, I just couldn't. Only going to meetings and hearing others. I have no idea what my, yeah, if you want to see my writing, you have to understand. My writing is very bad. I was detoxing. Only going to meetings and hearing others' stories about God in their lives has ever kept me sober. And it's like true, because again, just like writhing around that first 30 days while I waited to get into sober living, you guys. And that was just like the physical pain that I was in. It was barely equal to the mental and emotional pain that I was in. I was like, why can't I stop? Why can't I stay stopped? It was really scary to realize I had completely lost control of my drinking. I drank because I had an uneasiness with any feeling I experienced, from joy to depression to boredom. My DUIs and hangovers all became normal to me. I definitely drank for the ease and comfort I experienced, regardless of the shit show I knew would happen. It's like reality was too difficult to face for me and to process, and I had to continue escaping through drinking. I have such compassion for this 2017 Vanessa because she was really in struggle mode, and reality was a tough place to exist. Only in my mind, though, because actual reality was not that bad, but the cavern of horror stories that existed in this head, it was just like, oh, how could anyone be sober during a time like this? And the reality is, most of the population does it just fine. You'll be okay. I talk about my drinking habits. I switched from whiskey and gin in my early 20s to red wine to white wine in my late 20s to control myself better. I drink for one night and end up missing work for a whole week. I remember missing work for a whole week and saying that I had a stomach issue and went to try to make amends to that boss. And he was like, it's fine. When I got back, I had lost like 10 pounds, but I was still so bloated and fluffy, but I hadn't eaten anything that entire week. I was rolling around on the mattress on the floor, drinking boxes of wine. And by the time I was like, okay, I need to get my shit together and show up for work, my leggings were falling off my body. My coworker was like walking up the stairs behind me, and she was like, you lost weight in the last 5 days since we last saw you. I was like, oh yeah, I was really sick. I had a really bad stomach flu. And it was like short. It's called how, what was that called? Vantage or something? Or no, now I need to see what that, just so you guys know what a shitty wine was. Let me see. Oh, Vendage. Anyway, it was Pinot Grigios that I would drink. I literally just even looking at this right now. Has ever seen that? It was bad. They were cheap. They're like two for $6. And then they also fit in your purse if you can't afford that. Because that was was. Oh yeah, are you the type of addict or alcoholic with whom the psychological approach, treatment centers, detox, counseling, etc. fails? I was like, all of these have failed! Exclamation mark. Therapy, meds, rehabs, etc. All the self-help books in the world can't keep me sober. I know only God can. And I don't know that I knew that only God can, because I still relapsed in the middle of doing this step work. And once alcohol enters my body, I immediately need more and will not stop until I am blacked out and passed out. I don't understand moderate drinking or having only one. I cannot ever pick up a drink. Drinking was definitely a way for me to fill my time and have something to do without having to rely on another person. It's hard for me to develop close relationships, but easier to drink when bored. It was like I was so afraid of emotional contact with other humans, which is hilarious to me now because all I ever do is talk about feelings. Because now that I know, that's all I ever wanted to do. But growing up and the relationships, like the friendships and the culture that I grew up in, it was like, oh, you don't talk about feelings. That's personal. That's private. You handle your shit on your own. But that was all that I wanted. I was just a sensitive kid wanting to talk about feelings. And it was like the one thing I wasn't allowed to do. I got 2 DUIs in my early 20s. I didn't take them seriously. When I'd go to parties with friends, I was frequently the only one that blacked out, and my friends had to babysit me. I'd consider myself very independent and not a follower, though not sure a leader either. I always did the things I wanted to and usually didn't care if people thought I was strange. And the reason I didn't care is because I just get drunk. Like, you can't care about a lot of things when you're blackout all the time. I was a straight A student until I wasn't, and then I just graduated early. In work, I constantly strive to go above and beyond, and drinking definitely had a way of making me unreliable and undependable. But in a lot of ways, drinking also enabled my people pleasing and letting employers cross my boundaries. I was like, oh, I missed work last week, so then I'll just work super hard the rest of the week and work overtime and not get paid for it. Because I always felt like I had to overextend and overwork to prove my worthiness of being anywhere. And it usually came at the cost of my mental health and also created a lot of resentment. I constantly thought I was more creative when I was drunk than when I was sober. In reality, I just lacked confidence in myself when I was sober. My ideas were crazy when drunk. Throughout school, I would win art and writing contests, and I sought that rush of approval after a while. All my friends have called me crazy, even people I barely knew. Now I find it pretty dismissive because I feel like I'm pretty grounded most of the time. But back then, I was literally insane. I don't think I talk about it during this round of steps. I might share that story another time. Initially, it was something to do out of boredom with my friends, very social, except for when I'd steal it from my dad, and I began to look forward to it every weekend and every day. My drinking has gotten seriously out of hand. I fought with everyone close in my life. I pushed people away and turned people off by my drinking. Sometimes, because of the shame from the day before, I would drink the next morning. My anxiety would be through the roof. I do not miss the anxiety, you guys. I experienced a lot of guilt and anxiety over how I've treated people in the past and things I've said, so I just drink to dull the pain of that shame. At one point, did drugs or alcohol cease to be a luxury and become a necessity? Absolutely. I needed it to handle my relationship, my job, my family, my brain. I couldn't handle my own anxiety about life in general, so I would drink. At first, I thought that just by prayer, I could overcome everything. When that didn't work, I lost faith in God and started reading a lot of self-help books and reading about new kinds of meditation. I started going to the gym and doing yoga and completely pushed God out of my life. I remember that in order to get back into a sober living, she was going to ask me to be on antabuse, but I was in between insurance companies. And so I couldn't get the antabuse, basically. And I remember being like, am I really that bad of an alcoholic? I can't even get back into sober living without being on a medication to stop me from drinking. And she was like, yeah, you're a bad alcoholic. Oh, this was also the lady who told me I'd never be able to live independently. I now know that the answer is not within myself. I am not the only part of the solution. My brain is broken. I've been told several times I will die either by DUI or withdrawals, and that scares me, but has never kept me sober. That's super fun. I've relapsed even after being on a scram bracelet, which, if you don't know, it is that anklet thing you put around your ankle that monitors your skin and sweat to see if you have any alcohol. It vibrates. I had phantom vibrations on my ankle for 6 months after I wore this thing. I took it off before I was supposed to. It drove around with it in the back. It's like a hatchback type of thing. And I could hear it vibrating back there. And it's just like, it just haunted me. But yeah, that was a court-ordered bracelet. I drank, I removed it, and I went to jail. That was part of the violation for my third DUI and why I ended up getting jail time. I've relapsed after being on a scram bracelet, losing a relationship. I moved and it didn't help. I literally could not stop drinking. I would always lose control after I started drinking. I did terrible things I wouldn't have done sober. I'd completely changed personalities. I was always blacked out. I became a very angry, mean person drunk. Also very dangerous to society. I drink when it was inappropriate. I was always lying when I was using. I'd always wake up looking for another bottle or ready to get more. The description of a real alcoholic definitely describes me. They talk about the normal, moderate drinker, the heavy drinker, and the real deal alcoholic. And they break it down in this really, in the big book, they are acknowledging that there is a spectrum of drinking. And yeah, I was on the far end of that spectrum. It's really helpful to go through the step work and identify. And this actually really, I just remember this is, and the step is designed for you to really be brought down to your knees and realize the hopelessness of your life on your own self-will without a solution. If it's just you and alcohol, this is our drugs, this is all you got. And it's like, did not have much, I tell you that. I'm gonna just like really like 500 times, are you a real alcoholic? Really, I'll have to write that out. It is obvious to me that the problem is within myself and my mind. I have no idea sometimes why I start to drink again. I know exactly where it will take me, and yet I continue to drink. Now that's a delusion, because I don't actually know where drinking will take me. During some of my drinking, I thought that maybe the worst place I was going to end up, it was in someone's bed, and I ended up literally crashed into a fence in Norco or totaling my car on the 215 South or in jail in the drunk tank. I actually don't have any idea where drinking will take me. And it's a delusion to think that I know. My willpower has always failed me. I can try to reason with myself or another person, but by that time, my mind is already made up that I'm going to drink. And I guess I have lost control over staying stopped. I've had sober time before, but never the tools to stay stopped when the thought crossed my mind to drink again. So self-knowledge is not enough to keep me stopped. Even after being in AA, sober, I felt restless, irritable, and discontent. I tried eating, spending all my money, exercising, diets. I had an uneasiness. I did everything but go to God and try to help others. That uneasiness won't go away with self-knowledge. I need a solution to my problem. Otherwise, I go back to drinking. This is why sponsoring is so important and staying connected to other people in recovery, because it's really important. And also part of the reason why this channel was created was to help other people. People think that I want to always help people because I'm just like a really good person. And it's like clearly I enjoy helping people. And also like my so it's not a completely selfless alcoholic out there, okay? It just isn't. I can definitely tell how far I am from God by how often I think of drinking or acting out in other ways. Once I start living in fear, anxiety, or anger, I get closer to drinking and further from God. If I don't learn a better way, I'll go back to my old ways, guaranteed. That was the truth. Oh, yeah, this was a good question. And I still check on myself on this one too. Can you control your emotional nature? How? Not really. I seem to be easily affected by other people's moods. I often find myself angry or annoyed over the actions of other people, which I let ruin my day. I was highly irritable all the time. Everybody, anything, everyone, always irritating me. Like it was impossible for me to exist peacefully in the world because I was always so angry at how nobody else was following the scripts that I had for them in my brain that I didn't tell them about that they should be following anyway. I'm easily depressed and fall into bouts of self-pity and depression, although medication has been helping lately. Oh, I was heavily medicated during this time. I think I was on Depakote, Lexapro, Abilify, an antidepressant, mood stabilizer, and an antipsychotic. My medications changed a lot during that time. Although medication has been helping lately, I do go through moments where I feel without purpose. And that's a huge thing, not having a purpose. It's actually one of the most common denominators in addicts and alcoholics of why they begin to drink and use alcohol. And I think that it does come from early traumas or some traumatic experience because when something rocks your world to the extent that it can have you lose your place in the world and your sense of identity during a developmental year. And I feel like that's how that really sets up. And there's a lot of people who do have trauma who do not become alcoholics, by the way, but I don't know that there's a lot of alcoholics in the rooms who don't have trauma. It is interesting to see that because I think it does shake our foundation so much that we have a hard time making sense of anything else. And if we can't find our footing in the rest of the world, or we can't make sense of the rest of the world, then what does that mean about us and our existence? And there must not be any purpose. And that's a pretty existential crisis to be in if nobody else around you seems to be having a problem with their purpose on earth. It's like, how am I supposed to exist amongst these people? That's where you can fall into these defense mechanisms, these coping mechanisms of drinking or escaping through drugs. And so that's not actually any of the things that I wanted to read you guys. I wanted to read you guys the list of the 10 most insane things that I ever did when I was loaded after you took the first drink or drug. And this is one of the questions for step 2. So I'm going to read you the 10 most insane things I ever did when I was loaded based off my experience in 2017 when I first got sober. You ready? These are not even that crazy. I was not 100% honest here, but these are pretty crazy. Okay. I drove drunk and crashed many times, even another car head on. I went to mental hospitals weekly on 72-hour holds. I slept with guys I hardly knew for more alcohol or just because I was already drunk. I'd cussed out ex-boyfriends for no reason, really. Literally would just call exes who I didn't even talk to and just cuss them out. Oh God, I'm so sorry, you guys. I made amends to them. It's still terrible. I spent an entire week off from work drunk twice and then lied to everyone. Went to jails, work, community service, church, interviews, etc. Drunk. Stole money from Lowe's and then walked off the job to get drunk into the Applebee's down the street. Oh no, I think it was Mimi's Cafe. I called the cops on my ex-boyfriend, even though he hadn't done anything. Oh yeah, he was keeping me from drinking. That's what he was doing. Relapse while being in, oh, I would just go to work drunk. I actually would even drink because I had community service for my second DUI. Part of that community service was cleaning the city buses. Shout out to the RTA. We'd have to detail the cop cars. It was so terrible. The worst thing about it is that you had to wake up at 5 in the morning. Some nights I would be up until 3 in the morning just drinking Smirnoff vodka. I might as well just stay up. And so I would stay up until 5 and then do this. This was a 6-hour shift. Um, they would assign you a bus and you would just go into the bus and clean it. It was just wiping everything down. And then you would go on for the rest of the day. I would take a water bottle with me full of vodka and drink that on the bus. There were deputies monitoring us. This was court-ordered community service. If I had gotten caught, I would have been in violation. That was what I wanted to read to you guys. If you want to hear more about my early alcoholism, let me know. I hope that you guys are doing well. Again, these stories are not in any way, shape, or form meant to glorify, I don't know what the hell is so glamorous about drinking vodka out of a water bottle on an RTA bus, but it is important that we share some of those stories in that beginning part of when shit really began to hit the fan, because it's an important identifier. It's an important quality to see in other people. Oh, I have also suffered with this thing, and I also have gotten better. I also have a life that I did not think was going to be possible 10 years ago. In no way did I think that 2014 me was miserable. She was hoping to get hit by a car. I'm not even kidding. And that hadn't even gotten to the worst of it yet. So it'll be interesting to see when I surpass, when I have more sober time than I've had using time. I think that'll be a pretty cool milestone. But that's all I really have for now. Thanks for watching. If you did watch this, get yourself some ice cream because you deserve it. I love you. Bye.